All right. All right. Happy Thursday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Yvette Carnell. She is the CEO of the Odos Advocacy Foundation. Welcome, Yvette. So great to have you on.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
So I have a number of questions for you.
I can imagine.
A number of questions. So Dr. Sandy Darity, he's been on the show before. So he's talked about reparations on the show and about his book. I've been trying to educate people a lot about it, but obviously I consider you two to be the experts about this issue. I want to hear from you first and foremost, like, why did you decide to, co-found the Odos Movement? Why did you feel there was a need for that, especially during the time that you decided to start that organization?
Well, I think it all came out of like a wealth conversation, right? So I've always been talking about politics and talking about the need to have a specific agenda just for us, right? And then I met Antonio Moore, who was able to show like where we were in the wealth conversation. So it wasn't like me talking in abstract, like this is what we need. It was like, you don't have all the data, and I have the data to show like exactly what we need and how far behind we are. So that wealth conversation led people to be like, well, okay, then y'all keep telling us we don't have wealth. What do we do about it? And what we figured out is that you can't make it up through income. So the next thing that has to happen is that you have to have a redistribution of wealth from everything that was plundered, everything that was stolen has to be given back. And that is called reparations. And so we never got that. And you don't make up for it any other way. There's no way to close that racial wealth gap without reparations. And that's just a conclusion that we came to.
And that goes back to the myth that some people had about canceling student loan debt. I know that was something that Dr. Darity talked about often. He said, like, you cannot close the racial wealth gap by canceling student loan debt. You also can't do it by issuing baby bonds. So that really woke me up like to this issue and made me realize, okay, something else does need to be done here. But it's been done for other groups. And I want to get your opinion about that, because for people who are not aware, there were reparations that were implemented for Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps. Obviously, we all know that there have been reparations paid to Holocaust survivors from Germany, but also some instances from the United States. We just recently saw reparation demands from Governor Hochul in New York for Holocaust survivors. And for me, like, I'm not saying that those groups should not get that. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be repair for those groups, but it hasn't happened for descendants of slavery. And I want to get your opinion about that. Why do you feel that is?
Well, first of all, I think this country needs somebody to eat the failure, right? So all of these plants, all of these, when you talk about cancer rally, when you talk about environmental racism, when you talk about mass incarceration, somebody's going to do that labor for free in a prison. This country, capitalism, American capitalism, is built on somebody has to eat this failure. Like everybody can't eat good. Somebody has to absorb the failure. And that has been us. And so I think we occupy a very particular space in this country of always having to eat the failure. But there's something else other than the design. There's also the issue of storytelling. So when we talk about Jewish Americans, when we talk about Japanese Americans, when we talk about Holocaust survivors specifically, not just Jewish Americans, when we talk about that, the story around that is these people are deserving. They have suffered. They deserve to be made whole. That sort of thing. When you talk about reparations for Odos, there's this story of it's a handout. You all ought to just work. You could do better. You could make it up yourself. So the story around our suffering and what we're owed is very different than the story that's crafted for other groups. And that's where you find this disconnect at. I ask people all the time, like, you said you're opposed to reparations and everybody should make it up. Okay, did you oppose all these other groups when they got it? Did you stand up and say all these other people shouldn't get it? Or is it just us? And if it's just us, I want you to tell me why.
That's right. Yeah, that's a really good point. So this is a conversation that actually comes up oftentimes. Like, we do a call-in show once a week, and reparations is usually brought up almost every call-in. You can ask people in the chat. It's usually brought up. One of the things that people will say, this is one of the pushback talking points that I hear, is my family didn't own slaves, so why should I be responsible for paying reparations? That's one of the pushbacks that we'll get. Another one is that, if you were to give reparations to descendants of slavery, then it's actually going to cause resentment towards that group because the other groups in this country are not getting it. So this is something that Professor Richard Wolff has actually mentioned a while back. He said that his fear would be that then descendants of slavery in this country would actually be resented by the white majority. And I want to hear your opinion about that. Number one, that pushback that my parents weren't slaves, so why should I have to pay for reparations? And the other one about the resentment that could come with that.
Well, let me ask you a second question first. We've always been resented for reasons that had nothing to do with us. So that wouldn't be anything new. But I think what white America and quote unquote people of color America have to do is say, listen, well, you should help people get on board with that. Like, if you understand that this resentment is illegitimate and it's not based on truth, then you should get on board and saying, listen, they're old and this is what it is. The first part of your question, though, is what aggravates me the most. See, in this country, we don't do a la carte. We don't do a la carte anything. Like, you may be a pacifist and you do not agree with war. You may be an anti-imperialist and you say, I don't want to see the rubble bounce in any other country. But when it comes tax time, you don't have the opportunity to say, you know what, I want to pay for this, and this, but I don't want to pay for this. We don't do a la carte taxes and we don't do a la carte debts. So if you are an immigrant to this country, you inherit this country's debts, whether you like it or not. The country's debts become your own, right? And so you have to own that. And I want to know, even if we're itemizing things, when other people have gotten reparations, why is it you only want to come to this part and say, oh, I don't like this, I don't want to pay this? You would be fine. Listen, whether we talk about Guam, whether we talk about Japanese American, whether we talk about anybody, whether we talk about what's happening in terms of how America is assisting Holocaust survivors, as well they should be, in getting their due, you should want to do the same thing for us. If it's not racism, I don't see what it is.
That's a really good point. And the other thing I want to mention, too, for people who are also not aware, when reparations were given to Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps, that actually was signed into law under Ronald Reagan, of all people. So I don't.
You can't make this stuff up.
I don't know. Apparently, he saw a need for repair with that particular situation, but then the question of lineage comes up. So one of the things that I was educated about was, for the longest time, I kept referring to reparations as this is something that is owed to Black Americans. Mm-hmm. And people had to educate me about that and explain to me, no, reparations has to be based on lineage. Apparently, because of the 14th Amendment, that it could be overturned by the 14th Amendment if it was based solely on race. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because this is where it gets a little bit heated, because I do have friends that are from other countries like Jamaica or Haiti, or their parents are from those countries and they're first generation in the United States. And oftentimes the pushback with this will be, well, what about us? Because we go through some of the same issues that, descendants of slavery go through in this country. And they usually times will bring up policing, that like if they're driving, that obviously a police officer is not going to say, oh, well, they're Haitian, I'm not going to stop them, like that kind of thing. But I think the lineage thing is really crucial, and I think people need to hear about that.
Well, we always base, and the Supreme Court really narrowed that. We base any kind of redress on a specific harm. So the Supreme Court just told us, regardless of who feels any kind of way about it, I'm just talking about what they said. They said you have to have a specific harm. Diversity is not good enough. Melanin is not good enough. You have to have a specific harm. And that's what we have said the entire time. Look, we go back 400 years plus in this country. This racial caste that we have is based on being anchored in slavery. You can draw a line from slavery to Reconstruction to convict leasing to sharecropping to everything we have suffered for 400 years, this multi-generational oppression. I can draw a line. So that's what we're paying reparations for. There is this idea that you should get paid because of melanin. Melanin in and of itself, or having African descent in and of itself, is not a particular harm. And when we talk about the Black immigrant population, we see that most of them got here pre-1965. Black immigrants were to the right of the decimal point. They hardly existed in this country, right? And a lot of them were Caribbeans. When you go to 2000, that's when you get the bulk of Africans. And the ones that came before that came post 1990, right? For the most part. So you weren't like, to put that in context, I graduated from college in 1999. If you got here in 2000, you got here after my graduation. Like, how do you say that you were owed reparations? But the other part is your people, you or your people decided to, or your family decided to come here voluntarily. That was not our experience. We were sold away. We were brought here in chains. So your experience is not my experience. And your experience was probably, because you came here, made better because you were able to become American. Now, it's because of us that happened. It's the Immigration Act of 1965 that led to this enormous amount of immigrants, not just Black immigrants, coming to this country. So really, we already made a place for you to be here in this country. And we have when we talk about the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, we have a Black agenda that includes Black immigrants. But the justice claim is a sacred claim that is anchored in slavery. So if you don't have a descendant that goes back there, you are not eligible for that. Now, let me say another thing. None of us should base who we are or how we identify ourselves based on what a racist cop thinks. So a racist cop could think that it could treat an Indian American bad. They could treat a Mexican American bad. They could be racist about it to anybody. So how I define myself and how I define my particular harm is not based on how a racist cop may or may not perceive me on any given night. That's not how we do redress anywhere in the world. So I don't even understand how anybody should think that should be how we do redress here.
Would you say that, because this is something that I've said before, would you say that Haitians, for example, should ask for reparations from France, even though Haiti paid reparations to France, which is crazy?
I would support them asking for that. I would support them advocating for that. I would support the Congolese going to Belgium. I support everybody's specific justice claim. I think a lot of countries have gotten upended, their development upended. They have been plundered by Europeans, various European nations. And I think each of those countries has a right to take their claim to that specific country and say, you owe us. The Haitians absolutely have every right to say, you owe us. And France, you need to pay us. That is their justice claim. Now, their justice claim does not include me. I cannot go over there as an ADOS person and say, hey, Haiti, I know y'all just got this money from France. If they got reparations, hey, hand me a little bit of that, because we all African descent, right? No, that's yours. That goes all the way back to Susan Overture and all of that. The same way our claim goes all the way back to slavery, and it's anchored there. Everybody has a specific justice claim. That's the only case we're making.
That's a really good point. And I asked this question because I think that there has been a misunderstanding in reference to where you stand and where the organization stands in reference to Black immigrants receiving some type of repair. You're basically saying that their case should be taken to those countries like France or Belgium, etc. You're not saying that you don't think they don't deserve any type of repair. Okay. Gotcha.
No. They just, like, we're talking about, let's keep the example on Haitians specifically. They absolutely deserve reparations from France. Like, I will be the first one to buy them a drink and help them and celebrate with them, because you deserve it. You are owed it. They have plundered your country. They have stolen, and you have had to pay stuff back. That's awful. I agree with you. In this country, though, there's a specific lineage going back to slavery. Slaves built the country. Like, there is no other Black immigrant group that built the country. You may have come here. You may have made a contribution. A lot of groups did. That's not just Black immigrants that did that. But we're talking about slavery and a specific, all of our harms are anchored in slavery. All the way from there to 2024, they're anchored in that. And you have to define the harm group. In order to go through the courts, you have to define which group was harmed. I have all of the data for which group was harmed, for ADOS and how we were harmed. That data does not extend to any other group. You have to measure how much we were harmed. You have to measure our contribution to this country. There is no America without American slaves.
That's a really good point. Now, I want to get to this issue, because I think what has happened, like, there's a lot of things that I see from Odos that I think is absolutely phenomenal. One of the things that I have seen, and I know that you can't control what people post on social media. It is what it is. But there have been some social media posts that people would identify as xenophobic, right? Like, there have been some statements that have been made about Black immigrants, calling them names such as tethers or anchor babies. Like these are the posts that are on like mainly Twitter, you know how Twitter can be, that kind of thing. And then people will see that and they'll see that that individual person has Odos like in their byline or whatever. And so there has been this claim from others that they feel that Odos is xenophobic. How do you feel about that?
I think, I think the best thing people can do, honestly, is go to adosfoundation.org. If we're xenophobic, like as a group, as an organization, there's no way we would have an agenda that extends to the entire Black community. Like that's not, like you say, I can't control Twitter, but I can control our agenda. And that Black agenda and its suite of anti-discrimination that we call for and all that sort of thing, that extends to no matter who your lineage is. It's just reparations. So I cannot control that. But one thing I would actually say though too is people always call out the what they deem to be xenophobic. Nobody usually calls out the anti-AOS rhetoric, right? I saw somebody, and I pointed this out before, like, oh, you're the top slave, right? Like, when people call us, when we found out that they were calling us Akata, which means wild cat, and they were using that specifically and talking about ADOS. So you have to also understand that there has been some specific kind of anti-ADOS rhetoric. Part of the problem that happens, and I'm not just talking about Black immigrants here, I'm extending it out. You can talk about when the Irish became white or whatever. A lot of people kind of integrate into this anti-ADOS posture because they want to assimilate into whiteness, and assimilating into that kind of whiteness usually means assimilating into some of the ideas of white supremacy, which means that these people just don't work hard enough, they're lazy, whatever. So we see some of that as well. Now, the tether thing goes to another group. I don't really get involved with that. We didn't make it up. We don't use it. But what I'm saying is that these little spats and fights, they don't always start with us. There are people who have decided for a long time that it's their job to define ADOS, that they get to say who we are. If we say, hey, we're American, they get to say you're African, you're stupid, you don't know, oh, where's your family from? You don't even know where your people come from. Well, my people are here. I can tell you my grandma, my great-grandma, whatever, my people are here. So there are a lot of people online who try to diminish us as well, and that results in all kinds of fights and name calling because it's Twitter.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Even for me personally, I've had other groups tell me that I don't have any culture because I'm a Black American.
There you go.
That I have no culture. I don't know my real language, things like this. And I wonder, where does that come from? Why do these things happen? Like, for example, I live right outside of Boston. Boston, similar to, I would say, New York. People kind of have their own communities. So different immigrant groups have their own communities. And what I have noticed, whether it was New York or Boston, for the most part, I think people think that all of us are like a monolith, and that is not the case. There are certain neighborhoods that you can go to in Boston that are Dominican. There are certain neighborhoods that you go to that are Haitian. There are certain neighborhoods you go to that are Caribbean. But I think people, they just see the skin color and they think we're all aligned together or we're all in community together. And that's not the case. Where do you think that mindset comes from, that when you come to this country, for whatever reason, you're told, these are some of the things that were said to me by friends of mine that immigrated here, is that they were told not to coalesce with Black Americans. Where does that come from, and why does that happen?
I think when people come here, they come here to be a part of the winning team, and we're not the winning team. We are the oppressed people in this country. So I think that's part of where it comes from. And I think people have, kind of taken advantage of our belief that we're lost somewhere, right? You have people say, I'm an African and American. I'm a lot of things. I may be, I'm a lot of things. We're an amalgamation. I always say we're descendants of slaves and slave masters. I'm a lot of things. You don't get to tell me who I am. I'm a particular amalgamation. I'm a particular mix of whatever. America has a really interesting history in terms of immigration, white immigration, Black, ADOS. We have a particular, so I think there has been this thing that we've allowed for a very long time where we have allowed people to define us and tell us who we are. And there is a lot of pushback when we say, hold on, pump your brakes. We have agency here. We have an opportunity here to define ourselves and tell you who we are. And you don't get to define us. As a matter of fact, we know our culture. As a matter of fact, a lot of people around the world go around adopting our culture, and we create a lot of cool. And then you want to come and tell us we don't have a culture. And that sort of thing is offensive. So when you say that to people, and we have a particular culture in America, we have something that we built, we have something that we survived in this country that allowed you to be here. that is offensive. And I think you see a lot of fights. I think you see a lot of name calling on both sides. And I think we just have to be honest that it comes from both sides. It's not just us shooting darts at people.
Right. What happened to the movement at one point in this country? I think this was in the 90s. At one point, there was a movement in this country to find our roots back in Africa. I think you might remember this, Yvette. Remember when people were wearing like dashikis were coming? Like, all this stuff was coming back and people were saying we should find our roots back in Africa. And then we call ourselves African Americans. Why do you think there was that push for us to try to trace back our roots? And why do you think that kind of has, in some ways, that's kind of disappeared from what I've seen?
I think part of that is psychological. Honestly, I'm just going to be honest with you. I think America has been so hard for us that we romanticize Africa and we say, oh, if I was just in Africa, everything would be okay. I would be with my brothers and sisters. And we don't even really understand like a lot of their struggles, a lot of what they go through, that it's not this utopia of all of us just get along. You have a lot of African countries that don't get along with each other, right? So I think it's psychological to a certain extent. We really have a hard time in America, how we're seen in America. And part of the way we have dealt with that is a form of escapism, where we feel like everything would be better if I were in Africa. And here's my dashiki and I'm African. And it takes us out. To me, I have a problem with that too, because it takes us out of the fight. Because I believe we have to fight here. We have to fight for what we're all. We have to fight for our agenda, right? We have to fight for our politics. We have to fight for our policy. We have to fight for resources. So I think that I think that was a form of escapism. It was a psychological form of escapism where we didn't feel so, people have made us feel so lost. This idea of lost, we're lost. We're Africans in America. We ain't supposed to be here. We're a lost tribe. And I think now we're coming to terms with we're American. I don't care how you feel about it. I don't care. We can dislike all of the policies. We can dislike imperialism. And I do. We can dislike America's domestic policy. That doesn't make you any less American. And if you want this country to be better, you have to have a political fight with the people who run this country. And I think we're coming to terms with that. And a lot of people are uncomfortable about that.
So that brings me to the point about imperialism, because obviously, as you're aware, the war in Gaza is receiving a lot of attention. I've discussed it a lot on this show. I would actually refer to it as Israel's assault on Gaza. That's received a lot of attention. Another thing I feel is not being covered as much is the Congo. I've covered it a couple times on this show as well, but there's also a genocide taking place in the Congo. We're talking about over 6 million people that have been killed. We're talking about children being exploited for their labor, etc. But I have also been told by some reparations activists that this is not our fight, that we shouldn't focus on what's happening abroad. I disagree with that, because I do feel that there is a strong connection between foreign policy and domestic policy. I'm watching our government give Ukraine billions of dollars, giving Israel $3.8 billion every year. And I'm just telling people, like, your reparations is going to Ukraine. Reparations is going to Israel. But when we ask for anything, actually any group in this country, when you're asking for something, if you ask for healthcare, you can't get it, but all the money is going out the door. How do you feel about that, about the fight that's happening in Gaza, and specifically also the genocide that's taking place in the Congo too? And where is our place in that fight?
Well, I do feel that if you pay reparations, you won't have any money for any of this stuff. I feel like if we talk about 20 trillion, you won't have money for any. Like if you get on the reparations fight and we get what we're owed, there's no money for any of this stuff to go around. But part of the resistance that I think you see, and it's fine for you and I to disagree, because I don't have a problem with people who disagree with me. I think I see myself as kind of the true north. There has to be somebody who focuses only on us. Now, there are other people who are going to focus on other things, but in my estimation, what I do is this. If I don't have clean water, I was talking to somebody about Flint, and they were talking about how the water's still not clean.
Yep.
If I can't get clean water where I am, I have a problem believing that I can effect policy somewhere else. Now, I also say this. I sometimes ask myself, does what I say need to be said, and does it need to be said by me? Right? So if I see countries, whole countries, presidents, if I see legislators, if I see people way more powerful than me making a particular argument, regardless of what the argument is, opposed to imperialism, I then ask myself, if they're doing that, and they're not being successful, but they're doing that. What is the value of my voice? And could my voice be better used for my people to get clean water, to get access to wealth, to get access to capital, or could it be used over here? So my question is also about efficacy. What is the most effective use of my advocacy? And the most effective use of my advocacy right now is for ADOS people and the Black agenda that includes everyone.
So I want to show you this clip here from, I believe this is CNN. Yeah, from CNN. I want to show you something that happened on CNN this morning.
16. Good morning to all of you. Some pretty stunning images coming to us overnight, Evan. We also are just learning at this hour that banners have been hung from the hall. They read Hind's Hall and Intifada. Hind is a reference to a woman who was killed in Gaza. Intifada, of course, a reference to uprising, violent struggles that Palestinians have had over the years.
So I'm going to stop it there, because the reason why I wanted you to see this and everyone else to see this as well. First of all, the individual that was killed was not a woman. This was a 6-year-old little girl, a 6-year-old Palestinian girl. And when I saw this, it reminded me of the way that the media actually framed and, referred to Black boys that have been victims of police brutality in the United States. And they referred to them as a man. That's what it reminds me of. And I want people to understand, like, that is done. That's on purpose. This is intentional, because if the media tells you that it's an adult, you are less likely to have as much sympathy for that person than you are if it is a child. So what I see is the media doing some of the same things that they've done about particularly Black boys that refer to as or treat as Black men in this country. Some of the same things that they've said about Black people in this country, they're doing the same thing when it comes to the Palestinian people. And in particular, you've seen this across the board, whether it's Fox News, CNN, or MSNBC. And so that's where I try to make like those comparisons, like, look, whoa, they're kind of talking about them the same way they talk about us.
Well, the media has eviscerated us, and I'm not trying to be prickly, but nobody came to our aid. In the media, we had a whole Harvard smear where they talked about us and COVID. It didn't make any sense. They had to retract it. But I've been on the worst end of that too, and I know what they do. We saw it with Tamir Rice. We see it with a lot of that. So I certainly wouldn't be one to say that the media doesn't mischaracterize things based on their particular agenda. I would also say that the mainstream media is totally co-opted by the powers that be. And I'm not surprised by anything I see. The last time I saw the media, I was at a hotel in New York, and I turned it on, and I couldn't watch it because the entire news cycle was about Donald Trump falling asleep, and it wasn't in court, and it wasn't about anything that's important to the people. So I think you can point out a lot of ways in which the media mischaracterizes all arguments, mischaracterizes people to carry out their own agenda. I certainly wouldn't make an argument there.
So I guess one of the questions I have, like the movement that's happening across the world, but the movement that's happening in the United States for Gaza. We have voters who have said they are uncommitted for Joe Biden. And to me, I'm not voting for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So it's just, for me, I'm just like, whatever. But we have voters that were Democrat voters that are now saying that they are uncommitted as long as this atrocity continues. I think this is going into the general election. At first, it was just for the primaries, but it seems like it's going to carry into the general election. And I guess the question I have is, and I think you and I spoke a little bit about this privately, but why can't there be a movement from descendants of slavery in this country right now at this time to make those same type of demands to the Democratic Party?
We actually made those demands previously. We actually made those demands prior to the Palestinian push. We had a down ballot strategy, which said, don't vote the top of the ticket. They have to know that neither of these choices are good for us. We had a whole down ballot push, and I announced it at the 2019 conference. What happened was people like Joy Reid and a bunch of blue check Twitter that used to be blue check Twitter came out, and they said these people are engaging in voter suppression, right? And I said, no, this is voter expression. We are saying that we don't want Joe Biden, Jim Crow Joe, and we don't want Donald Trump. We don't want either of these people. They're not speaking to our needs. They're not speaking to our agenda. We invited everybody to our conference, right? So you don't show up, you don't want to talk to us, you don't want to respond to our needs and our agenda. We don't want either one of them. And when we said we're going to vote down ballot, we're not going to vote for these people, everybody said we're engaging in voter suppression. And the media campaign led by MSNBC, enjoy reading those people, led a campaign to say that we were suppressing the Black vote.
But this time around, I feel like it would be different just because you already have different groups saying that they're not going to vote for Joe Biden unless we have this permanent ceasefire. Like you have the Muslim community saying that, you have a lot of younger voters saying they're not going to participate. So just imagine now if if that happened again.
Trust. Trust. First of all, most of us are not going to go out and vote blue no matter who or red no matter what. Right? We're not doing that. So that push is happening again. Listen, I want everybody to be responsive. I want to give everybody a chance. Maybe the sky will fall and they will say something different than they said last time. But if they don't, we're headed down the same road again. We're not going to go to this thing where we have to vote for, we have to be scared of the Republicans and vote for the Democrats no matter what they do. We're not doing that this time regardless. So, we will mount a campaign to do something like that the same way we did the last election, because we just don't see them coming to the table unless hey, Democrats, if y'all want to come to the table, you can. But from where I sit right now, I don't see them coming to the table with something meaningful that will improve our material quality of life. And we have changed the trajectory. We're not going for that anymore. We want a substantive agenda for us. That's what we want.
Well said. Yvette, how do you feel about the reparations bill that Jim Clyburn keeps referring to that's in the House? Because from what I understand, like when Ro Khanna came on, I talked to him about this. It didn't really sound like reparations to me. I didn't hear anything about cash reparations that part of that bill. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like that's just pandering? You feel like that bill is never going to go anywhere?
I feel like once you mention Jim Clyburn's name, it's probably pandering. That's what I feel like. But it doesn't have cash payments. The funny thing is, if you're talking about HR 40, like we were responsible for getting the bulk of those co-sponsors because we initially were like, maybe this is a way in. But what we realized is that, Ron Daniels and the crew who did this before did this, and he admitted this, and it was largely symbolic. And so a symbolic measure is not what we need. I'm not supportive of that. I think we're going to have to do our own thing on that. That's not going to go anywhere, right? And part of what we have to do is create this push within our own community and the wider white community. We have to help people understand why this has to happen. And it's not just about, white people trying, you got to get to help us. White people have to ask themselves, and people of color too, do you want to move away from, do you want to ever move away from this kind of like marching to movement work, right? Do you want to live in this America that is always divisive because you keep sidelining us and we keep being marginalized and disenfranchised and we're wealthless and all of this stuff that comes from slavery? Do you want a country where we have some kind of harmony? And you have to ask yourself that. And I need everybody to ask themselves that, because this is the road to a path where we have a country where we have true harmony, where we don't have to necessarily, we can be in the street over something else, but we don't have to necessarily be in the street over race and racism. We can close that lineage wealth gap and keep it closed over time, because we're not just talking about closing it, we're talking about maintaining that closure. We can have a country that moves closer to that. And we need people like us, people like the ADOS and ADOS movement to have more power, because I'm not interested in making the rubble bounce anywhere, right? But if we don't have more influence and more power in these rooms, then and to increase spending and all of those sorts of things that just kind of relegates this spending for defense, this spending for militarism, you're never going to get it. I was watching this right-wing guy talk about somebody sent him a letter, and the letter said, "Oh my God, I had to get welfare, and now I don't want to kill myself because I had to get welfare." And he was like, "You see, this is my money shouldn't go to Ukraine and Israel and all this stuff." And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, what the man is describing is a good of government. That's what government is supposed to do, is pay for citizens. He's gotten something from government to pay for citizens. First of all, that's first. The second thing is, if you all had not stigmatized the welfare state and made it just about us, he wouldn't feel bad about it. Third of all, if you all hadn't tried to destroy the quote unquote welfare state, you might not be able to send money across the world, because this quote unquote welfare state will cost too much. So I don't think people on the right understand how they cut off their nose to spite their face. But I am for increased spending for citizens, right? And so that we have something that the floor should only fall so low. So people always say, man, we want to do something for all people and reparations just for ADOS. Yes, it is. But I am not opposed to doing something for everybody too. I believe that America doesn't have enough. We don't have enough pension. We don't have enough anything to catch our own citizens when they fall. So just because I'm in favor of reparations and a transformative Black agenda doesn't mean I'm not in favor of all the things that people on the left may be in favor of.
That's a really good point, Yvette, because I think some people may have had that perception because there are two different reparations groups. There's ADOS and there's FBA. And I think some people are trying to figure out the difference between the two. And I want to hear your take about that, because I do know there's been rallies, et cetera, but
I don't think there are two groups. I think there's one group that's, just led by somebody who says they're not a leader. I don't mind it anymore. It is what it is. But they don't do serious work. I think they do good fighting sometimes on Twitter. But that's kind of their lane. And we're an organization. We have chapters across the country. We have a conference in October. Like we do political trainings. I think there are other people who kind of do the fight online, and maybe that's their lane. And that's, if they want to do the battle back and forth, that's their lane. That's fine. But I wouldn't categorize them as a group that goes offline. And to the extent that some of them do go offline, they end up doing stuff. Those of them who are serious end up doing stuff with ADOS, right? Because, there isn't a group. It's one person who does that. And God bless them all.
So one other thing I had a question about is reparations through the states. So there are a couple of people that came onto the show before. There was Camilla. She's a part of Reparations Task Force in California. She came on to talk about their efforts there. There's also a reparations committee that has been established here in Boston, Massachusetts as well. What do you think about this method or this strategy of people trying to get some type of reparations on a state level? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, first of all, I don't think the state can pay. I don't. It's not about think. I know they can't pay the debt that's owed. Right. That's out of your wheelhouse. Now, I do think, depending on who is running the local reparations task force or whatever it is, I think they could do good. So it's not to say that you could not make a payment. It's not to say that you could not do good work. You could be very prosecutorial, right? So let's say you have a state and you could put together studies, because studies cost money, where you show all the ways in which this state undermined, disenfranchised, and oppressed ADOS. That is something that we can use as leverage to take to the government. So we can do state by state by state. All of y'all pay these $150,000, $200,000, whatever you got to pay for studies, whatever you got to pay for these academics, and let's get all of this stuff together and take it and use it as leverage against the federal government. So I think there are a lot of creative ways that local reparations can be helpful. But it really depends on who the leadership is in that particular state.
Yeah, because in Boston, it was actually determined from the study that Black wealth was only $8. Black family wealth was $8 in Boston, and for white families, it was like $250K.
And we have a chapter in Boston. I mean, we have ADOS Mass, and they have been involved in those, in those conversations. So I do think there's something to be done. I do think there's a way to move forward, but we have to be very careful that we don't have a few states do this, and then a president comes and says, "Hey, we've already done reparations."
I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. That's interesting. One more question for you, Yvette. What would you say are the next steps for ADOS? I know you have chapters across the country. What are the next steps in going forward and implementing some type of, or getting the federal government to implement some type of reparations?
Well, we just have to become too big to ignore. Everybody, you can go to joinados.com, but we just, and go to adosfoundation.org to see the agenda. Don't trust what anybody says, just go look at it. But I think we have to become, in America, good things happen through movements. They happen through movement work. I don't care what they're talking about, civil rights movement, labor movement, it happens through movement work. And you have to become so big that the president can't ignore you. I have to deal with these people. And so what we're focused on right now is our own growth. We're focused on building our movement. We're focusing on launching new chapters. We already launched some in 2023. We've launched in 2024, and we plan to carry that out. After that, then we might go and get, with college chapters. So we have a movement that's based on building our capacity, because it's one thing to make the argument. It is another thing to actually go out there and do the work. It's another thing to go out there and try to get the attorneys. It's another thing to go out there and try to do the research. We've also recently launched the ADOS Research Institute, where we're welcoming. And if you want to assist anybody, please feel free. We have who are PhDs in there who are going to do research that's specific to us. So we're moving in the direction of being able to define our loss and do activism based on that loss throughout the country.
Yvette, where's the one more? Sorry, Yvette.
Sure.
One more. Where's the NAACP on this?
The national. I don't want to speak ill of some people on the ground. I've met people on the ground who are trying to do good work. The national NAACP is co-opted though. Like they're not doing the work of ADOS anymore. They're doing the work of whoever Democrats want them to do the work of. They're not doing our work anymore. And if I were to ask you, like if somebody were to ask me, where ADOS sees itself in 10 years or 5 years even, I think we should be the premier organization that does work for ADOS. I don't want to see any of these other organizations, Urban League, NAACP running around using our faces for marketing. But when it comes time to do the real work, they're nowhere to be found. They're everywhere else. They're scattered. And that's one of the things I say about what we do. I don't oppose what everybody else decides they want to do, but we are focused squarely on this bottom caste group that became a racialized bottom caste because of slavery and has been that ever since. That's what we're focused. That's what the NAACP should be focused, but they're not.
Awesome. Yvette Carnell, thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it. I had a great time.
Bye.
Have a good one.